Greetings, welcome, and thank you for clicking. I'm Christian of Standing Stones Healing Company, encouraging your journey with Reiki, card reading, and coaching for life's changes, challenges, and transitions. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Ask the Stones, offering spiritual guidance and encouragement for life's challenging questions. Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Ask the Stones. Our question comes from Paolo, and this one is a bit lengthy, so thank you, Paolo, for this question. Over the last years, I have struggled to be consistent in my efforts to improve. I have a lot of goals and dreams, but am unable to put them to practice. I can be consistent for 1, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and after that, it all falls apart again. Over and over, I fall back into old, useless, and even destructive habits every time, not being able to progress. Now, I have planned 3 days off for next week, all by myself, away from my wife and 2 young kids, for the first time since I met my wife. Already it feels weird to just leave the house, but I want to find out what is going wrong over the past decade and how to change it going forward. I feel stuck. I'm so tired of my behavior that has been sneaking back into my life again and again. I really want to make the best of those 3 days, since I never took time off like this, away from everything, able to really think and plan my life ahead of me. How would you go into such an exploration? How do I find out what it is I need to change to at least be able to fulfill my ambitions? Have you ever had any experience with this approach to realign one's self? Paolo. Thank you for this question, Paolo. I really appreciate this question. This is no small question. This is quite a big thing. So I want to say thank you for this, and congratulations to you for asking these really challenging questions, because, Paolo, oftentimes as we go through our lives, we are not asking these big questions, and we're just going about our lives, just really, in a sense, maybe piecing them together or never asking these larger questions. So the fact, Paolo, that you're asking these really big questions is a really great thing. So good for you. The first thing that I really want to say to you, and as I read your question that really comes up, that I want to encourage you to do, Paolo, is to maybe be easy on yourself, be gentle with yourself, be kind and understanding of yourself. What I hear in your question, Paolo, and what I hear in your comments is really some beating up of yourself. And I really want to encourage you to be gentle with yourself and to maybe release judgment of yourself. This is actually something that I frequently advise, is to work to release judgment of ourselves. Increasingly, I think that oftentimes we are so hard on ourselves, and that we often beat ourselves up, and we beat ourselves up for beating ourselves up. And Paolo, I really hear in your question very much beating yourself up. And I want to encourage you to try not to do that, That's not easy. We're human beings. It's not an easy thing. But to really encourage you to release judgment of yourself for this idea of struggling to be consistent in your improvements. Now, Paolo, there's a lot in your question that I don't know. I know a lot from your question, but there's a lot that I don't know. I don't know what kinds of goals and dreams you have. I don't know what efforts you have made to improve. I don't know what kinds of improvements you've tried to make, and I don't know what your struggles have been. But I don't need to know them in order to offer some encouragement to you. The first encouragement that I really want to offer you, well, after to be gentle on yourself and to maybe not be so hard on yourself, is that as you go into your trip next week, your time away, which by the way is a wonderful thing. I think this is great that you are setting aside purposeful time to think about your life, to contemplate who you are and where you want to go. This is a wonderful thing. And I also really want to encourage you, Paolo, to not put so much pressure on yourself to have everything figured out in 3 days. I don't know about anyone else listening, but for me, I certainly could not have my whole life figured out in 3 days. As a matter of fact, it's taking me my whole life to figure out my life. So, Paolo, I want to encourage you to maybe set the bar low for those 3 days and to not set your expectations so high for those 3 days. To think that in 3 days you will be able to figure out what's been holding you back for the last 10 years. To think that in 3 days you're going to have all of your own idiosyncrasies, your own quirks all figured out. To think that in 3 days you're going to have your life plan written and that you are going to be able to know just what it is you need to change to fulfill your ambitions. So I really want to encourage you, Paolo, to not set your sights so high for what you can or want or should achieve in those 3 days away. Because what I am getting from your question and your scenario, Paolo, is that you may already in your life be setting unrealistic expectations for yourself. And you may already be saying, oh, I'm going to do this grand big thing and it's going to be great. And then, no, I'm not. I'm just back to my old habits and ways of doing things. There are numerous reasons why we may be challenged to achieve our goals and why we may be challenged to stick with goals. And one of those reasons is that sometimes we try to do too many things all at once. We try to make too many changes at once. And when we try to make too many changes all at once, it can be hard to stick with them. Now, I've done a lot of reading on habit formation. I know a lot about habit formation. I'm not going to go into all of the details, all of the tips and tricks with habit formation. Things like what they call habit stacking, where you align one habit with another habit and you can get into that habit because it's attached to another habit, and all of those things. I'm going to instead focus in on some of the greater things about this question, because there's a lot about habit formation out there, a lot that you can read and learn about with habit formation. I particularly recommend a great book called The Power of Habits by Charles Duhigg, D-U-H-I-G-G. I believe it's Charles. Is it Peter? I always mix it up. It's either Charles or Peter, but it's Duhigg, D-U-H-I-G-G. And that's a great book on habits. There's also a good book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'll tell you, though, that James Clear has taken a lot of what Duhigg has said in his book that came first. So just FYI. But James Clear book is also excellent. So I actually do recommend them both when it comes to habits and sticking with habits. But what I really want to encourage you on, Paolo, is not so much the details of how to stick with your habits as it is about these larger questions of your challenges. And what I'm gathering is maybe a tendency, Paolo, to be a little hard on yourself. And so I really want to encourage you to maybe to, rather than putting the focus on all of the ways that you have struggled to be consistent and all of the ways that you haven't met your goals and dreams, I really want to encourage you to be gentle on yourself about that. And as you go into your 3 days next week, I really want to encourage you to start with what you've been doing right. So rather than putting the focus on what you've been doing wrong over the past 10 plus years, I really want to encourage you to consider what you've been doing right. Because what I hear in your question is so much about how you haven't been doing things right, how you've been falling back into your old and useless and destructive habits, how you haven't been able to progress, and how you haven't been able to move forward, and how you're struggling to realign yourself. That's a lot of self-judgment, Paolo. That's a lot of dumping on yourself. And so I really want to encourage you as you go into your 3 days away, your 3-day time for self-exploration. I really want to encourage you to go into it not from a standpoint of what's wrong with me, but rather from a standpoint of what have I done right. Because I think when it comes to life planning, life visioning, realignment, I think it's really best for us to approach that from a place of joy, excitement, self-love, and not self-loathing, not one of self-judgment, not one of beating ourselves up, which, Paolo, is a place that it strikes me that you are coming from into this work. And so I really want to encourage you to start in those 3 days. I want you to start with the things that you have done right. And you know what, Paolo? That may be your full 3 days. You may want to spend 3 full days, all of your time, just focusing on the things that you have done right over the past 10 and even more years for your whole life, Paolo. What are the things that you have done right? What are the things that have gone well? What are the goals that you have accomplished? What are the dreams that you have realized? What are the things that you have improved upon? Because I guarantee you they are there. I guarantee you that you have had goals that you have achieved. Maybe getting married and having children were a couple of your goals. Well done, goals achieved. So give yourself credit for those. What are the things that you have done well? What are the things that you have done, quote, right? I'm putting right in quotes here, Paolo. But I want you to really explore that. And I want you to take your time doing that. And I want you to, yes, even take all 3 days just to focus on what you have done well. I really feel, Paolo, from your question, that this is going to be a good use of your time over those 3 days. And a good use of all of your time over those 3 days. Because my guess is, Paolo, that as you explore what has gone well, the ways that you have improved, the ways that you have been consistent, the goals and dreams that you have achieved, my guess is that you're going to find that you've actually done maybe a bit better than you have expected. And that maybe you have weaved your web in a better way than you thought. Paolo, I don't know if you've ever watched a spider weave its web. I have a lot of spiders at my house. I have a lot of flowers, which brings in a lot of bugs, which brings in a lot of spiders. And beyond that, I also live on a corner with a street light. So I have a lot of spiders, and I have a lot of spiders that live on my house. So making lots of webs on my windows and all over the place. So Paolo, I have the real privilege of getting to watch a lot of spiders build their webs. And one thing that I have noticed in watching spiders build their webs is that as they weave their web, they don't just weave and weave and weave and weave and weave and stop and they're done. And the web is all done and great, it's perfect. And I'm going to go wait for some bugs to get in it so I can have dinner. What they do is they will weave a part of the web and then they tug on it. They pull at the strands. And they'll weave another part of the web and they'll tug on the strands. Oftentimes, they also will weave and then they will go back to the center of the web and they will pull. They'll get all of their legs into the action and they'll use all of their legs and they'll pull and tense and then pull again. And so they'll do this pull, pull, pull kind of action in the center of the web. What the spider is doing is they are checking the tension of the web. They are checking their progress. They're checking their work. They're making sure that their web is going to be a good web to catch some flies. They are checking their work as they go. And so when you talk about this idea of realignment, spiders are constantly doing this as they build their web. They're not just building it haphazardly. They're not just building it and waiting until it's done to make sure that it is tense enough and structured in the right way to meet their needs and to meet their goals of catching insects for sustenance. Rather, they are checking as they go along. And so the spider is doing this exact thing, this idea of realignment and checking all of the time and constantly. It's a beautiful thing to watch. You know, the spider doesn't just build its web and then say, "Whew, I hope that works." They are checking it as they go to make sure that it is going to work. And so you are, over the next few days, Paolo, what you're doing is that you are bringing yourself back to the center and you're pulling all of the strands. But this is not the only time that you're going to be able to pull all of the strands and check the tension. Remember, the spider is doing this all along. And so what I really encourage you to not do is to go into your 3 days thinking that this is like the once and done. You're going to do this, you're going to go for these 3 days, and you're going to have everything figured out. Because the spider sure is not doing that as it is weaving its web. It is checking and rechecking. It's weaving a little bit, and then it's checking that section. It's just weaving a little bit and checking some more. And then maybe it's going to the center and checking the whole thing, and then going back out to places where maybe it feels a little off, and then weaving a little bit more. So it's a real process for the spider. And I want to encourage you, Paolo, that it's a real process with your realignment and not something that in 3 days you can have everything figured out. Like I said, it's taken me my whole life. I'm 41 right now. It's taking me my whole life to figure things out, constantly checking the tension, constantly reinforcing the web, tightening things. And so I really want to encourage you to see this as a lifelong practice and not a 3 days once and done kind of thing. Now, it sounds to me, Paolo, that you already have been doing that. So every time when you are, setting your goals and trying to put those into practice, maybe you're consistent for a few weeks, it all falls apart. That's part of building the web. That's part of the process. That's part of creating the structure. And so I really want to encourage you to see those inconsistencies, that quote, falling apart, as a part of the process. Because every time that things, quote, fall apart, it's an opportunity for us to learn about ourselves, to learn about how we work, to learn about what doesn't work, and to readjust, to check the tension of the web and to rework those parts that aren't working as well, and to reconfigure those parts that are maybe not really tensed well enough to be able to catch dinner and to meet our goals. So I don't necessarily see this, Paolo, as a bad thing where you've had challenges to be consistent, because those are opportunities for learning. Those are opportunities for deeper understanding. So I really want to encourage you to put the focus on what has gone well and what you have done right over the past years, and to also look at those times when you have been inconsistent and haven't followed through, not as opportunities to beat yourself up, but rather as opportunities to learn. Opportunities to understand where the web just needs some reinforcement, where the web just needs some strengthening. The spider, I'm sure, I'm not in the spider's head, but when I watch those spiders, I'm sure that they're not going to the center, pulling on the web, and then saying, oh crap, I messed up in that spot, gotta go back. I really think the spider is just saying, yep, if I want to catch dinner, which is my goal, to eat and survive, I just need to go back and redo that spot. It's just information for the spider. And it's just an opportunity for the spider to learn where their web needs to be strengthened to meet their goals. And I don't think the spider is beating itself up and saying, oh, I'm a bad web maker. Oh, I don't know how to do this. Oh, I'm so terrible at making webs. I'm never going to catch dinner. No, I think the spider just says, I'm hungry and I want to eat, and I'm going to fix this so that I can eat. And they don't say, oh, yeah, I really suck at making webs. I'm just going to starve. So Paolo, I really want to encourage you to approach this process like the spider, and to consider this as an opportunity for you to come back to center and pull all of the strands, but to know that this is not your one shot to fix the whole web all at once and done forever. Too, the spider is always making a new web. So it's not like it's weaving one web and that's the one web to rule them all. It's making webs constantly. As a matter of fact, the spiders that I have at my house that I watch, Paolo, they make a brand new web every single night. These are nocturnal spiders. They come out at night. They make a brand new web every single night. Because when daylight comes, they take down that web so that they cannot be found. It's actually really fascinating. If they don't take the web down, then there's a greater chance that they'll be found by a particular kind of insect that eats them. So and they trace them back they find them based upon their webs. So it's a mechanism of survival for these kinds of spiders to take their webs down. I'm sure that's way more info than you wanted to know, Paolo. It's fascinating. But anyway, the point is that they are creating new webs all of the time. So they're always creating and destroying their webs, their means of survival. And it's not a bad thing for them. It's just part of what they do. And every time they build a web, it's a new chance to learn and grow and create something that is going to achieve their goals. And so I think for you, Paolo, this experience is a wonderful opportunity for you to just check the tension on the web, but know that this is not your only opportunity, and that web checking happens as we weave. It's something that we do as we go. You know, Jack Canfield also talks about this in his book, The Success Principles, this great idea of a plane in its flight. And a plane is like always off course, and it's always realigning. So as a plane flies, it is constantly adjusting. And it's not just moving forward in one straight path. It is going a couple of degrees in one direction, and then it's bringing itself back to a couple of degrees on path, and then it's constantly moving and recentering and realigning itself. And a plane gets to where it needs to go. I mean, you know, the plane going from New York to LA is off course most of the time in its flight. It is not pointed straight at LA. And is always realigning and readjusting. And it's these thousands of realignments and readjustments that add up to getting the plane to where it needs to be, to landing where it means to land. And so the realigning and the readjustments are not a bad thing for the plane. They're part of the process. So these realignments and readjustments that you've been doing all along, you know, the starting and the stopping, that too is part of the process. So Paolo, I encourage you to not be too hard on yourself for those readjustments and realignments, because they are part of the process. One thing I also want to encourage you to do over the course of your 3 days, Paolo, in addition to really putting the big focus on what you've done right and what you've done well, is to consider your values. You know, so often we think about ourselves in terms of our behaviors, our goals, the things that we want to do, the things that we want to accomplish, and our behaviors, and even our beliefs in terms of our identity. When I really want to encourage you to focus instead on your values. What are the things that you value in life? Because, you know, the thing is that our life experiences come and go. Our jobs change, where we live changes, all kinds of things about our life changes. Our lives are always in flux, just like the plane, always going in a different direction and realigning. And so our behaviors change, our beliefs change as we gain new information, as we grow and change. And one thing that often doesn't change is our values, what it is we value at our core. And to me, I think that is so much more important than goals or our career, you know, who we might identify as in this exact point in time, which may be different in the future. Rather, focusing on our values, I think, really allows us to anchor ourselves to certain things that are true and really are going to be true for us. No matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, no matter what our goals are. I think that Values serve as life anchors for us. I'll tell you, for instance, Paolo, my life values are love. First and foremost, always love. Gratitude. I am a massive believer in gratitude. It is my greatest value in life after love. Love, gratitude, kindness, respect, and compassion. Those are my core values that no matter what, my life is aligned with those things. So I am always aligning and realigning my life to those core values. And my life could be drastically different from what it is now in a few years. I might believe completely different things. I might be a completely different person in some ways. Career, relationships, location, you name it. Our lives can be completely different from one point in our life to the next. But I know beyond a doubt that no matter who I am, what I am doing, how I identify, those are still going to be my core values. I am always going to be putting love first. I am always going to be focusing on gratitude. I am always going to be striving to increase levels of kindness and compassion and respect. That's who I am at my core. So no matter what my goals are, no matter who I am, what I'm doing, whether I'm doing Standing Stones healing or not, of course I want to be, and I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I will be striving for greater levels of love, gratitude, kindness, compassion, and respect, no matter what I'm doing. And I want to encourage you, Paolo, to explore those values for yourself, because those are so much more important than any goals you might have. Those are so much more important than whether or not you are being consistent with certain things. I don't know what your goals have been. I don't know what your efforts to improve have been. And when you can have strong values that serve as a beacon for you, like a lighthouse, that guide you no matter what, then you can align everything to those values. And if it doesn't align with those values, then it's not right. It's not for you. It's not what is going to serve your life. So that's my recommendation for you, Paolo. Rather than focusing on finding out what it is you need to change to be able to fulfill your ambitions, I might recommend exploring your values and doing some thinking about your values and what kind of person you want to be, who you want to be. I think so often we focus on goals, and I'll be honest, I'm a goals-oriented person. I set my yearly goals, I write them out on a big piece of paper, and I tape it up on my bedroom wall, and I cross them off as I achieve them. So I'm definitely a proponent of goal setting, and I think too often we focus on what we want to do and what we want to accomplish rather than on who we want to be and how we want to show up in the world. I think it's not so important what we do as it is how we do it. And so if you are trying to make improvements, quote improvements, depending upon what they are, and you are finding that you are challenged to implement those changes, and at the same time you are doing things in love or whatever your values are, I think that's what really matters. It's not, I think, what we do in life as it is how we do it. And so I want to encourage you, Paolo, to consider those values and to consider how you want to be, how you want to show up, who you want to be in the world, what kind of person you want to be, rather than what you want to accomplish. These are my encouragements for you, Paolo, as you go into those 3 days. Definitely, though, taking the pressure off of yourself to really have it all figured out in 3 days. To figure out why you do the things you do or don't do the things you don't do in 3 days, that's a lot. That's a lot of pressure, Paolo. You may be having challenges with consistency and implementing measures because you may have been putting too much pressure on yourself. You very well may have been pressuring yourself to make sweeping changes that were unrealistic. You may have been pressuring yourself to be some vision of yourself that is someone else's vision or some cultural ideal and not yours, Paolo. So I really want to encourage you, maybe you value being a good husband and a good father. Maybe that is one of your core values. And so then I would ask you, what does that look like? What does it look like to be a good husband? What does it look like to be a good father? And to consider your improvements and your goals from those values. That may very well help you to be more successful with their implementation. Sometimes, Paolo, when we set goals that are not in alignment with who we are at our core, we are setting ourselves up for failure. We're going to have a hard time achieving any goal that does not align with the core of who we are. And so I do encourage you to always start with those values when you are considering behaviors that you want to implement or behaviors that you want to remove. By the way, you mentioned that you are sick and tired of your behavior sneaking back into your life time and time again. It's much more challenging for us to get rid of behaviors than it is to incorporate new behaviors in terms of replacing them. So just one tip here, Paolo, before I draw some cards for you. I'm sure you can hear me shuffling. One big tip with implementing change is that it's really helpful, can be really helpful for us to focus on what we are bringing into our life rather than on what we're removing. And we can have greater success when we focus on not on removing a bad habit, but rather adopting a new habit. So like, for instance, if you want to quit smoking, rather than putting the focus on quitting smoking, putting the focus on replacing the habit of smoking with another positive habit that you do want to adopt. So you may want to consider thinking about the things that you want to bring in rather than the things that you want to get rid of. And so rather than putting the thoughts on that behavior that you are sick and tired of, putting it on the behavior that you want to incorporate and that you want to be. I'm going to say just a few more things about goal stuff right now before I draw some cards. Sorry, Paolo, I'm having the thoughts, and I think it may be helpful for you. Is that identity and habits go hand in hand. And that when we want to make changes in our lives, we can start on a very, very small level. As a matter of fact, James Clear does talk about that. Atomic habits, very small, is this idea in his book. But very small identity changes can be helpful as well. So very small action changes and very small identity changes. Years ago for my students, when I taught goal setting, I created a goal setting kind of a wheel where it really just goes around in a circle, where you start with very small. There are two places you can start: very small identity changes or very small action changes, and that will get you onto the wheel. Very small identity changes will lead to very small action changes, will lead to larger action changes, which lead to reinforcement of identity and greater attachment to that new identity. I know I just said a lot, but the idea here is that, like, for instance, let's say you want to incorporate some healthy eating habits, saying, okay, starting off with, I am a healthy person. I make healthy choices. So getting into that mindset of being the kind of person who makes healthy choices. So I am a healthy person, and then taking one fewer sip of alcohol, or whatever it is that the unhealthy thing that you are doing. Or let's say that you want to stop drinking coffee. One less sip of coffee in your next drink. Just leave the last sip in the cup. And then, I am a healthy person. I am a healthy person is leaving the last sip in the cup, and leave that last sip. The next time you have a cup of coffee, leave 2 sips in the bottom of the cup. I am a healthy person. A healthy person leaves 2 sips of coffee in the bottom of the cup. And that habit is going to be reinforced by your adoption of the identity, which will be reinforced by the proof in the cup. So that then will lead to greater changes, which, when you see yourself making those greater changes, will lead to a greater identification with your new way of being, your truth of being a healthy person. And that's just a cycle that goes in a cycle, a big cycle for yourself that is just reinforcing, self-reinforcing. So that is one way to kind of get into it. Great. So I'm going to, you know what? Before I draw some cards, I'm going to send you some Reiki for your trip away, Paolo, for your 3 days that I really want to encourage you to just relax during. Listen, Paolo, if you just spend those 3 days hanging around in a hammock reading books, there is nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, that may be a really great way to spend those 3 days. Just to get out and get away and have time and space to yourself. I want to encourage you not to feel guilty. If you end up spending those 3 days doing nothing, or if after the end of those 3 days you have not, quote, accomplished all of the things that you set out to accomplish. Remember, lower your expectations. It's okay if you sleep in all day, if you watch TV, if you prop your feet up, if you read a book, that's all okay. So I want to encourage you to release judgment of yourself for those 3 days, because I do hear a lot of judgment of yourself in your question. So, please join me in taking 3 deep cleansing breaths. And everyone, I'm going to send Reiki to all of us for our realignments, sending Reiki to all of us for coming back to the center and tugging on the web, and doing that consistently, and doing that not a once and done thing, but doing that constantly all of the time in small ways. As always, if you don't want the Reiki, don't worry, it won't go to you. Great, very good, Paolo. So, as I sent Reiki, I saw the image of a cabin. Now, of course, I don't know if you're going to a cabin or not, but here's the idea. You can go to that cabin anytime. You do not have to physically go away to a cabin to go to the cabin. So, yes, you are going away for these 3 days, and it's a great opportunity for you to be in a cabin-like place, to be in a metaphorical, figurative cabin. Maybe you're going to be in a literal cabin, I don't know. But, Paolo, we always have the opportunity to go to a metaphorical, figurative cabin anytime we wish. We always have the ability to go back to the center of the web and check the tension. We always have the ability to tug on the strands as we are building the web. So know that this is not your only opportunity to check the tension, to realign, and that this is something that is available to you anytime, at all times. It's always, the cabin is always right there for you, Paolo. So Paolo, I'm going to pull some cards for you for your journey. So Paolo, as I was shuffling, I parted the cards and looked down, and it was the high priest. And the high priest was looking up at me, and I shuffled it back in. I wasn't thinking, and just shuffled it back in. Probably that would have been a really great card to pull for you. And so I've shuffled through, I've looked through, and here it is, the high priest. And I do just want to call out the high priest and encourage you to claim your power, to own your power, to be considering balance during your trip, during your exploration, but most importantly, what balance means to you, Paolo. So what balance is all about for you. Now, of course, that was not the card that I pulled. So as I parted the deck again, what came out was the Six of Cups. And in this image, there are a couple of dragons. There are children playing with the dragons and just enjoying the dragons. I want to encourage you, Paolo. What I'm getting from this card is that during your journey, I really want to encourage you to be playful, to maybe not sit at a desk racking your brain, considering what you've done wrong all of these years. Instead, to maybe lose yourself in some playfulness. So in this image, there are dragons rising out of some water. I don't know if at your literal or figurative cabin there's going to be a pond or a stream. I encourage you to go play, whatever might be there. If there's a stream, go sit by the stream and look for bugs, insects, maybe find a spider building a web. Wouldn't that be great? But to just be watchful, play, just have a sense of wonder about you as you go out. This is an opportunity for you to detach from your life and to live in the moment. And kids are really good for that, for living in the moment, for being absorbed in their surroundings. And so I'm picking up the real encouragement, Paolo, for you as you experience your 3 days, to be thinking about not thinking and to be just absorbed in your surroundings and being playful. Approach these 3 days like a kid might. Why not? All right, Paolo. Here we go. So, The rune that I have pulled is the rune of disruption. And this is a time of disruption for you. Really, quite literally, a time of disruption with going away. But it's also a time of an opportunity for you to disrupt what you've been doing and disrupt the experience that you have been having. Now, with this rune of disruption, Paolo, I do really want to encourage you that, again, to not maybe go into it with this huge expectation that you are going to come out of that experience a completely different person. Your life is going to be completely turned around, and you have everything figured out and no more challenges with implementing goals. I think that's unrealistic. And I think that having that kind of attitude is setting yourself up for failure. And so I want to encourage you to look at this as a disruption, as a break, but disruptions do not need to be massive in order to be helpful and effective. So this disruption is going to be helpful for you, but it is not the only opportunity for disruption. This is not the only way that you can find disruption, and it is not the only opportunity for you to disrupt your weave building to check the web. So, Paolo, I send you blessings and best wishes for your trip. I send you encouragement for considering your values, for being gentle with yourself and releasing judgment of yourself, and recognizing that this realignment experience is something that we can do again and again at any time. It's always available to us. So, Paolo, thank you so much for listening. Thank you all for listening. I send you blessings and best wishes for the checking of your webs. And I send you blessings and best wishes for your journey. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Ask the Stones. If you have a question for Ask the Stones, please send me an email at christian@standingstoneshealing.com or connect with me on Facebook at Standing Stones Healing. Thank you, and best wishes for your journey.